They call him the Ice King, a billionaire with a heart of stone and a billion-dollar lie. Julian Sterling built empires, crushed rivals, and trusted contracts more than people. To fix his image, he hired a woman for $1 million. Not for love, but for appearances. A fake fiancé. A perfect lie. The rules were simple. No emotions. No attachment. No humanity. But everything changed the night she knelt in the mud to save a dying stray. And Julian watched with cold disgust instead of compassion. In that moment, she realized she wasn't standing beside a powerful man. She was standing beside a monster. Tonight, the contract ends. The money means nothing. And one truth, long buried, is about to shatter the frozen world of Julian Sterling forever. The rain in Manhattan didn't fall. It attacked. It was a cold, rhythmic drumming against the cracked pavement of the Lower East Side, turning the city's grid into a slick, treacherous slurry. Elara Vance, 24 and feeling twice her age, stood huddled under the fraying canvas awning of a corner deli. Her boots were leaking, and her fingers, usually so nimble when delicate brass gears were involved, were stiff with cold. In her pocket, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, an eviction notice that felt heavier than any lead weight. She was a restorer of antique clocks, a trade passed down through 3 generations of Vances. She loved the poetry of time, the way a heartbeat could be captured in a series of interlocking cogs. But poetry didn't pay the predatory medical bills for her younger sister, Mia, who was currently fighting a losing battle against a chronic respiratory illness in a cramped, mold-scented apartment. Her phone buzzed, the vibration jarring against her frozen thigh. It was her agent, Marcus. "Elara, I have a weird one," he shouted over the background noise of a busy office. "A private commission, top floor of the Sterling Tower. The pay is, Elara, it's astronomical. It's enough to clear your arrears and move Mia to a penthouse with an air purifier. But you have to go now. He doesn't like to wait." An hour later, Elara stood in the lobby of the Sterling Tower, a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the very clouds. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-dropping ascent to the 80th floor. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a world that felt fundamentally different from the one she had left below. The air was pressurized, smelling of expensive cedar and iron silk. The penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalism. White marble, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the chaotic city into a silent, shimmering toy. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the gray sky, was Julian Sterling. At 32, he was the Ice King of Wall Street. He was built like an athlete but moved with the calculated stillness of a predator. "You're late," Julian said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. He didn't turn around. The subway was flooded, and the world outside doesn't always move at the speed of a private elevator, Elara replied, her voice steady despite the fact that her wet coat was dripping onto his pristine floors. He turned then. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and shadow, anchored by eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic. He didn't look at her leather tool bag or the magnifying loupe hanging from her neck. He studied her, the way she held her chin high despite her frayed cuffs, the defiance in her gaze. "I don't actually have a clock for you to fix, Miss Vance," he said, walking toward her with a predatory grace. "I have a reputation to fix. My board of directors thinks I'm a sociopath. They want a family man to lead the merger with the DuPont estate. My grandmother, the only person who holds enough shares to challenge me, is dying. She wants to see me settled before she passes." He slid a leather-bound folder across the marble kitchen island. $1 million. 6 months. You play my fiancé. You live here, in the guest wing. You attend every gala. You make them believe I am capable of love. Elara felt a surge of indignation that warmed her more than the building's climate control. You want to buy a person? To lie to a dying woman? Quote, I'm buying your time and your silence, Julian corrected, his expression unchanging. I know about your sister's bills. I know you're 3 days from the street. I don't offer charity, Elara, I offer trades. This is a business transaction. Nothing more. Elara looked at the contract. It was a deal with the devil, written in perfect legalese. She thought of Mia's coughing fits in the middle of the night. She thought of the cold. If I do this, she whispered, we stay professional. No touching unless there's an audience. And I am not your property. Agreed, Julian said, his voice like cracking ice. I have no intention of making this real. Sign it, and the first installment will be in your account before you leave the building. Elara took the pen. As the ink hit the paper, she felt the gears of her life shift into a new, dangerous rhythm. The transformation was not a gentle transition. It was a surgical overhaul. Within 48 hours, Elara was stripped of her thrift store sweaters and oversized flannels, replaced by a wardrobe that felt like a beautiful, restrictive suit of armor. She was scrubbed, polished, and draped in emerald silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. As she stood before the mirror in the guest suite, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The shadows under her eyes, the mark of 1,000 sleepless nights worrying about Mia, had been expertly concealed by makeup artists who worked with the silence of ghosts. The car is waiting, Julian's voice echoed from the hallway. When she stepped out, she found him waiting by the elevator. He was in a bespoke tuxedo, looking every bit the untouchable monarch of Manhattan. His eyes raked over her, a brief flicker of something. Surprise? Approval? Passing through those stormy depths before the ice closed over them again. The annual Founders Ball is the centerpiece of the social season, Julian said as the elevator descended. Every person in that room is looking for a crack in my armor. You are here to be the gold that fills those cracks. If I touch you, don't flinch. If I speak to you, look at me as if I'm the only man in the room. I'm an artisan, Julian, not an actress, Elara retorted, adjusting the heavy diamond necklace that felt like a collar. For $1 million, you're whatever I need you to be, he replied coldly. As they entered the ballroom of the St. Regis, the wall of sound and light was overwhelming. Flashbulbs popped like tiny explosions. Julian's hand settled on the small of her back, his palm large and searingly hot through the thin silk of her dress. It was intended to be a gesture of possession for the cameras. But Elara felt the heat of it radiate through her entire body. It was the first time a man had touched her in months. And the sheer proximity of him, the scent of sandalwood and expensive scotch, made her head spin. Smile, Elara, he murmured in her ear, his breath ghosting against her skin. You look like you're headed to a firing squad. In this crowd? I might be, she shot back, flashing a radiant, practiced smile at a passing photographer. They look like they eat their own for sport. Throughout the night, Julian was a machine. He navigated the room with lethal efficiency, using Elara as a shield against prying questions about his personal life. He spoke of mergers and acquisitions with a clinical detachment that made Elara shiver. But as the night wore on, the music changed to a slow, haunting cello piece that vibrated in the floorboards. We have to dance, Julian commanded. It wasn't an invitation. On the floor, the world narrowed, as he pulled her close. Elara realized Julian wasn't just cold. He was rigid with a tension she hadn't expected. She felt a tremor in his hand as it clasped hers. Up close, away from the prying eyes of the board, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a man holding his breath. You're hating this, she whispered, looking up at him. The height difference was significant. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. I find performative intimacy repulsive, he snapped, though his grip on her waist tightened. It's not performance if you actually breathe. Julian, she said softly, her voice dropping to a register only he could hear. She moved an inch closer, resting her head against his shoulder for a brief moment. Just for a second. Stop being a billionaire. Stop being a brand. Just be a man dancing with a girl. For a fleeting, heartbeat-long second, Julian's body softened. He inhaled sharply, the scent of her vanilla perfume cutting through his clinical world. For 5 seconds, the mask slipped, and Elara saw a flash of profound loneliness in his eyes. A boy lost in a castle of his own making, terrified that if he let anyone in, the whole structure would crumble. Then, the song ended. Julian pulled away, the mask snapping back into place instantly. That's enough. We've given them what they wanted. But as they walked off the floor, Elara knew the truth. The Ice King wasn't made of stone. He was made of glass. Frozen under a pressure she was only just beginning to understand. 2 weeks later, the mid-November air had turned into a razor. Inside the leather-scented sanctuary of Julian's Maybach, the heater hummed a low, expensive tune. They were en route to a high-stakes fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum. A night designed to finalize the social backing for the DuPont merger. Julian was buried in his tablet, his thumb scrolling through spreadsheets with mechanical precision. We arrive. We stay for 90 minutes. We leave, Julian said, his voice flat. The DuPonts value punctuality above all else. If we're late, it looks like a lack of discipline. Elara stared out the window, her heart heavy. To Julian, every minute was a currency to be spent or saved. She watched the blurred lights of the city, feeling like a ghost trapped in a luxury cage. Suddenly, a flash of movement in the street caught her eye. Stop the car, Julian. Stop. Quote, the driver, startled by the sheer panic in her voice, slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt in the middle of a busy intersection. Elara, what are you doing? Julian demanded, his eyes flashing with annoyance. We're already behind. Quote, she didn't wait for him to finish. She threw the door open and bolted into the freezing rain. In the middle of the asphalt, huddled against a storm drain, was a small, shivering heap of orange fur. It was a stray cat, its leg twisted at a sickening angle, its eyes wide with a terror that mirrored the city's indifference. Elara, get back in the car. This is absurd. Julian stepped out, his silk umbrella held aloft by the driver. He looked like a dark god of industry misplaced in the mud, his polished shoes splashing into a puddle of oily water. He's hurting. Julian, look at him. Elara knelt in the gutter, ignoring the fact that her $5,000 hand-beaded gown was soaking up the filth of the New York street. She scooped the small, wet creature into her lace shawl, feeling its tiny heart hammering against her palms. I'm not leaving him here to be crushed by a taxi just so you can be on time for a cocktail. Julian watched her. He saw the rain ruining her $800 blowout, the mud staining her silk, and the absolute, unwavering fire in her eyes. For a moment, he looked genuinely baffled, as if he were witnessing a foreign language being spoken for the first time. Fine, Julian sighed, his voice losing its icy edge. There's a 24-hour emergency vet 3 blocks over. We're taking the cat, but we are going to be late, and I will have to answer to the board for it. At the shelter, the Ice King stood by the door of the sterile waiting room, looking profoundly out of place in his tuxedo. Elara didn't just drop the cat off. She stayed until the vet confirmed the leg could be set. While they waited, an elderly woman sat nearby, weeping quietly as she clutched an empty pet carrier. Without a second thought, Elara went to her. She sat on the hard plastic chair, took the woman's weathered hand in hers, and listened. She listened to stories of a cat named Barnaby and a life spent in a rent-controlled apartment that was now too quiet. Julian watched from the shadows. He saw Elara offer a warmth that couldn't be bought, a genuine empathy that made his billions feel like monopoly money. "You're a strange woman, Elara Vance," Julian said as they finally returned to the car. "Nearly 2 hours behind schedule. It's called being human, Julian. You should try it. It's more rewarding than a hedge fund." When they finally arrived at the gala, they were a sight of beautiful chaos. Elara's dress was ruined. Her hair was a mess of damp waves. But she walked in with her head higher than any socialite in the room. The whispers started immediately, but they were cut short by the arrival of Genevieve DuPont. Genevieve was Julian's female counterpart, cold, exquisitely dressed, and hungry for power. She slid toward Julian, her hand landing on his forearm with a proprietary grip. "Julian, darling," she purred, her eyes raking over Elara with a sneer. "I heard about your little rescue mission. How quaint. But really, Julian, surely you're tired of playing house with the help? A man of your stature needs a partner who understands the weight of a crown. Not someone who spends her nights in gutters with strays." Julian didn't pull away. He looked at Genevieve, then at the board members watching from the bar, then at Elara. His face was a mask of calculation. He didn't defend her. He didn't say a word. He simply offered Genevieve a tight, professional smile. Elara felt a physical pang of jealousy so sharp it felt like a blade. It wasn't just the insult. It was the silence. In Julian's world, she was still just a temporary asset, easily discarded for a better deal. The ride back to the penthouse was a vacuum of sound. The city lights blurred into long, distorted streaks of neon against the Maybach's windows. But inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wet silk and unspoken resentment. Julian stared at his phone, his thumb flicking through emails with a frantic, mechanical speed that betrayed his inner turmoil. Elara sat as far from him as the leather seat allowed, her hands trembling in her lap. The moment the elevator doors hissed shut behind them in the penthouse, the silence shattered. Elara kicked off her ruined heels, the sound of them hitting the marble floor like a starting pistol. "You didn't say anything," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She turned to face him, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. "You let her talk to me like I was a stray myself. You let her stand there and suggest I was the help, while you just smirked." Julian threw his tuxedo jacket onto the sofa, his movements jagged. "Genevieve is a key player in the DuPont merger. Elara, I've told you this. I wasn't going to jeopardize a billion-dollar deal in months of negotiation over a few petty social insults." "A few petty insults?" "She humiliated me, Julian. She looked at me like I was something you'd stepped in on the sidewalk." Elara stepped into his space, her eyes bright with a mixture of rage and hurt. "Is that all I am? A line item on your balance sheet? A temporary fix for your PR problem?" Quote, "You knew exactly what this was when you signed the contract." Julian roared, finally losing the icy composure he had worn like a shroud for years. He loomed over her, his shadow stretching long across the minimalist room. "I brought you into this world to play a part, to look pretty, to smile, and to give the board a reason to trust me. I didn't hire you to demand my soul or to sabotage my business with your sentimental crusades." Quote, "I'm not demanding your soul. I'm demanding your respect," she yelled back, her voice cracking. "I spent tonight watching you look at me like I was a nuisance for saving a life, while you looked at that shark like she was an asset you couldn't wait to acquire. I can't do it anymore, Julian. I can't live in this museum of a house, pretending to love a man who has a block of granite where his heart should be." Quote, "Then leave." Julian slammed his hand against the marble kitchen island, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the high ceilings. The money is in your account. Take it. Go back to your clocks and your drafty apartment and your poverty. If I'm so monstrous, why are you still standing here? Quote, I wish I could. Elara's voice broke into a sob, tears finally spilling over. She leaned into the pain. I wish I could just walk out that door and never look at your beautiful, miserable face again. But I can't. You arrogant, cold-hearted idiot. Because I'm in love with you. I'm in love with the man who drove me to the hospital when I was falling apart. I'm in love with the man who stayed at that shelter tonight because he couldn't stand to see me cry. You're so terrified of being human that you've built a fortress out of money. But I see you, Julian. I see the boy who's still waiting in that hospital room for someone to show up. Quote, the silence that followed was absolute. Julian froze, his chest heaving, his mouth slightly open as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He looked at her as if she had just struck him. The words, I love you, hanging in the air like a physical weight. Elara covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her release. There, you have it, the ultimate leverage. The Ice King wins again. I love you, and it's the most miserable, humiliating thing that's ever happened to me. She turned to flee toward the guest wing, her heart feeling like it was being torn from her ribs. But she didn't even make it 2 steps. Julian's hand shot out, catching her arm. He didn't pull her back with his usual cold authority. He pulled her back with a desperation that was almost violent. Before she could speak, he dragged her into his chest, his arms wrapped around her so tightly she could feel the frantic, staccato beat of his heart against her own. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, and for the first time, Elara felt him tremble. Say it again, he rasped, his voice raw and broken. Say it one more time. I hate you, she sobbed into his shirt. No, Julian pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The stormy gray was gone, replaced by a vulnerability so deep it was frightening. Say the other part, because I've spent every night for the last 3 months terrified that if I touched you, if I let myself feel a single thing, I'd never be able to let you go. I don't want the merger. Elara, I don't want Genevieve. I want the girl who ruins her dress for a cat. I want you. The final act of their deception became the first act of their reality. The morning after the confrontation, the penthouse felt different. The clinical chill hadn't vanished, but the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to catch on more than just marble and glass. It caught on the shared glances and the tentative, lingering touches of 2 people who had finally stopped playing a game of shadows. Julian didn't go into the office that day. Instead, he made a series of phone calls that sent shockwaves through the financial district. By noon, the DuPont merger, the billion-dollar deal he had sacrificed his sleep and his soul for, was restructured. He didn't just sideline Genevieve DuPont. He removed her family's firm from the lead position, citing a fundamental misalignment of values. It was a move that cost him millions in short-term stock value. But for the first time in his life, Julian Sterling didn't look at a ticker tape to measure his worth. You didn't have to do that, Elara said, watching him from the doorway of his study. She was wearing one of his oversized cashmere sweaters, her hair pulled back, looking more at home in his world than she ever had in emerald silk. I didn't do it for the money, Julian said, standing up and crossing the room to her. He tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. I did it because I realized that if I spent my life building empires with people like Genevieve, I'd eventually become one of them. I'd rather be the man who makes you proud. The real test came a week later at the final signing ceremony. The boardroom was a cathedral of mahogany and ego. The DuPont lawyers sat on one side, looking like vultures in pinstripes, with Genevieve at the center, her face a mask of fury. Julian entered, but he wasn't alone. He held Elara's hand firmly in his. She wasn't wearing a rented gown or borrowed diamonds. She was wearing a simple, elegant suit of her own, her eyes clear and unafraid. "Julian," Genevieve said, her voice dripping with venom. "I assume this distraction is finally over? We have a contract to sign." Julian sat down, but he didn't release Elara's hand. He placed it on top of the table for everyone to see. "The contract is changing, Genevieve. I'm moving the Sterling Foundation's headquarters to the upstate medical district. We're funding a new wing for respiratory research, directed by the specialists who saved Mia Vance's life." The room went silent. Genevieve sneered. "You're throwing away a legacy for a girl and a charity project? You've gone soft, Julian." "No," Julian said, his voice dropping to that icy baritone that used to terrify the street. But this time, it was backed by a new kind of strength. "I've gone honest. This merger continues on my terms. Or it doesn't continue at all. My fiancé's time is more valuable than your posturing. Either sign the revised terms, or leave." Genevieve looked at the fire in Elara's eyes and the immovable wall of Julian's resolve. She signed. That evening, they escaped the city. Julian drove his own car. No driver, no security, just the two of them heading toward the quiet hills where Mia was now recovering in a sun-drenched cottage. The air was crisp and smelled like pine and coming snow. Back at the penthouse later that night, Julian led Elara to the window where they had first met. The city lights twinkled like a carpet of fallen stars. "The 6 months are up tomorrow," he said softly. Elara felt a sudden, sharp pang of anxiety. "I know. The contract is fulfilled. I was never good at following someone else's blueprints," Julian murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. But when he opened it, there was no diamond. Instead, it was an antique pocket watch, its gold casing worn smooth by time. Through the crystal back, the intricate gears were visible, moving in a perfect, rhythmic dance. "It's a Vance original," he said. "Your grandfather made it. I tracked it down at an auction in London. It's been broken for 40 years. Elara, no one could find the heart of it." He placed the watch in her palm. It was ticking. The heartbeat of the machine was steady and true. "I don't want a new contract," Julian said, dropping to one knee on the marble floor he had once stood on so coldly. "I don't want a trade. I want you to be the one who keeps my time. I want to grow old in a house that smells like your vanilla perfume and sounds like your laughter. I want to be the man you saw in that hospital waiting room every single day for the rest of my life." He looked up at her. The Ice King completely surrendered. "Will you stay, Elara? Not for $1 million. But for me?" Quote. Elara looked at the watch, then at the man who had learned that the most valuable thing he owned was the heart he had almost forgotten he had. She reached down, cupping his face. "I told you once that you just needed someone to wind you back up," she whispered, her eyes brimming with happy tears. "I'm not going anywhere, Julian. We have all the time in the world." In the heart of the city that never sleeps, the clocks finally struck midnight, and for Julian and Elara, the real story was only just beginning.